Jackie Reses, born and raised in Atlantic City, New Jersey, the daughter of a pharmacist and small business owner who went on to graduate from the Wharton School, a board member of Endeavor, Affirm, and Nubank, former advisor to the San Francisco Fed. Now she's at the forefront of fintech disruption as the co-founder and CEO of Lead Bank. Jackie Reses is in the Changemakers spotlight. Jackie Reses, thank you so much for joining us and inviting us into your beautiful home for this interview.
Thank you.
So your career is remarkable. You have a reputation for working harder than anyone else, which seems like it started back when you were a kid working at your parents' pharmacy, and you've always been entrepreneurial. You and your brother ran a carnival games business back on the
Straight out of Jersey.
Straight out of Jersey, on the Jersey Shore boardwalk. So I want to get into all of this and your history and what turned you into the change maker that you are today. But let's go first to the change you drove most recently, which is at Lead Bank. In 2022, you bought a community bank in Missouri, and you transformed it into this bank that is providing infrastructure to fintech companies, while at the same time maintaining the community bank that it has been for so long. Why did you decide to do this?
Because not everyone buys a bank as like the next thing they want to do in their career. I had built a bank when I was at Square. That is a very unusual thing to do. And I think Square is the only tech company in the United States that owns a bank. And so I had the opportunity to build it from the ground up. First line of code, first policy. And that was a unique vantage point to understand how the banking system works from a first principles point of view. So I decided when I left Square, I wanted to go buy a bank because I wanted to solve the problems that I felt in my prior job. And so I went and looked for an amazing bank that was well run, that had an amazing employee base in a great state, great city, and I came up with Lead Bank. And so I got very lucky. Kansas City has adopted me. I feel very lucky to be a part of that community. And so I'm building a fintech infrastructure company, but I have maintained the roots to Kansas City. We have amazing clients. They're rock star people. They care a lot about how we operate in the city. We like to contribute as part of the community. We show up, to arts events, to football games, to whatever needs to happen in Kansas City. We have great employees there. And so I didn't see a need to take ourselves out of the community banking space. I just added on this fintech infrastructure layer, and I'm building a bank that I wished we had when I was at Square.
So you were serving a need that you identified when you were at Square. What's so fascinating to me is you were out here in California. You could have continued with another job here in California, or you could have retired, but you decided you wanted to take on this challenge. And so many of the changes you've introduced at Lead are about transparency and speed.
Yep.
What are you trying to do with this new type of company?
I really want to change the way banking happens in the United States, full stop. I'd like to see financial services evolve to be a digital-first future, a digital-first industry. And I think we've only just started to do that. One of the problems I've seen is that fintechs over the last 10 to 15 years have put a beautiful sheen on the front end of an app to make financial services easier. And I think we've all felt that with fintech apps that we use. The infrastructure, however, is terrible. And I wanted to change the infrastructure. So the first real problem that touches the Federal Reserve in order to provide scalability, reliability for fintech products and financial services products globally to be able to adopt to a future where all transactions are digital.
So this is a very ambitious goal.
Yeah, it is.
And when did you start developing this goal? Was it when you were at Square?
It was, because that's the place where I felt the pain. I didn't like the relationship that we had with the banking system and the partners that we had broadly at Square. And as much as they were some of the best financial institutions in the world in some cases, and in others very small banks that we partnered with, none of them were built to provide the scale that at the time Square needed, and also to operate with the agility and the speed that a technology company operates with. And there had to be a way that you could combine the systems of a bank, the primitives of the banking system, with the speed, the agility, and the substance of the way tech works in order to change the way banking is done in the United States.
So you've tackled tough challenges in the past. Let's rewind and go back to your job at Square during the pandemic. It's March 2020. There is this unprecedented shutdown due to COVID. People are panicking. They're worried about their financial well-being, but first and foremost, they're worried about their health. There are so many different things going on. I had my children doing school from home. I think you did as well.
Yes.
But during all of that chaos, you had the peace of mind to come up with a plan that would enable Square to play a transformative role in helping small businesses during the COVID pandemic. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a pivotal moment in my life and something I'll remember for the rest of my life, as will everyone on my team will say that it was one of the most incredible experiences they've ever had. Stressful, but incredible. There was a moment in time at the very beginning of the pandemic when the government was trying to figure out how to help small businesses, but there was no real answer for what to do. And there were different kernels of ideas around how do you go help mainstream America? And we had this idea to take the distribution of Square and fintechs, which is very different than mainstream banks, because Square helps the food trucks, the barbershops, the restaurants, as does other fintechs. And we had a way to get to them that most large banks really didn't. And so at that point in time, I had this idea that we should call the Treasury Secretary, it was Steve Mnuchin at the time, and offer our services as a fintech and try to get a coalition of fintechs together so that we could provide the distribution to the Treasury Department for some kind of financial support for Main Street America. And we were working on that at the same time that Mnuchin was working on PPP, which at the time wasn't named PPP. The Treasury was trying to come up with a loan financing program in the capital markets, and different senators were trying to work through the creation of bills. And so we had the foresight to just pick up the phone and call the Treasury Secretary and say, like, we're in. We want to do what we can. And my co-founder, Erica Khalili, and I had written a term sheet to create a credit facility for Main Street America to build a massive multi-billion-dollar credit facility. Wasn't big enough at the time, but we thought that would be a great way to provide support for Main Street America. We pitched it to the Treasury Secretary, and he at the time was thinking through the idea of doing it from a paycheck point of view. And he coordinated the Senate and us and other fintech players to come along and try to support small businesses in the United States. And so we got involved in that program very early on, and it was probably one of the most intense life experiences I've ever had. We had to build a product in 2 weeks that was one of the biggest lending programs ever created to serve Main Street America. And our team literally worked 24/7. And we did stand-up meetings twice a day, 7 days a week. We had the entire company volunteer to do customer support and operations. So it didn't matter whether you were the CEO of Square or you were the most junior brand new employee. We all worked on this program to onboard and give people access to this lending program once it was created. And it was pretty surreal at the time, but it was literally like the most scrappy, fluid program I've ever worked on. And so between us and the Treasury team, and then us and the SBA, we had this amazing, cohesive, 24/7 activity going in order to have a full network effect with small businesses across the United States.
So, and you were really in the weeds.
I mean, in the weeds.
And the SBA, the Small Business Administration, gave out your phone number So
Yeah.
you have the SBA gave out your personal phone number.
That was a bug, not a feature.
So
but I
did you
took every
know
phone
that
call.
they were going to call you? That
No.
they were going to give out your number and you were getting flooded with phone calls?
No. I mean, there were moments when I was away with my family and someone would call and someone would be crying
So
about...
small businesses would call you because the SBA had given out your phone number.
Yes. And you either take the point of view that these people are bothering you, or you listen to the story and decide that you have to help them. And because I grew up behind the counter of a retail pharmacy, I took every one of those phone calls and did what I could to help these people. And in some cases, I would say, like, I'm not a tax expert. Like, please only listen to me so far. You have to go get your accountant to help you. But here's what I think it is. If I could do pattern recognition around what I was watching across all these entrepreneurs. And I feel like that kind of personal experience changed a lot of people's lives, or at least gave them hope. And if that was like the minor participation that I could have in this program to support these small businesses all across the United States, I was in. And I was going to do whatever I could to support them.
You seem so driven by an intense sense of purpose. The fact that you even wanted to pick up the phone and call the Treasury Secretary, while there was so much other stuff going on with kids at home and feeling like the world, or I was feeling like the world was falling apart, but the fact that you had that intention to call the secretary, you did it, and that you took every phone call, what is driving that sense of purpose? And did that purpose become more sort of refined and clarified by the pandemic?
Yeah, you know, I think I've been pretty consistent with who I am from being a child. And I'm not sure I have changed that much. I'm much more refined in my communication style, but I think I am who I am. And the reality is I'm a kid who grew up behind the counter of a retail pharmacy in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And my family all owns small businesses. I think I'm one of the only people to actually go work for someone in my family. And so when you grow up with that environment, I think I appreciate it for what it is and how important it is to how the United States works. There are 30 million small businesses across the United States. If not for working behind that counter, I would not have learned things like how to support customers, right? Like customer centricity, I learned from my mother, you know, who was a pharmacist behind the counter. And my father went out on oxygen deliveries in his medical supply on Christmas because a client needed him. And if someone's sick, he's going to show up. Even on a holiday, he didn't care. And so showing up and work ethic was something I learned from my parents and my father. And so I look at that environment and I kind of don't know any other way. Like, we didn't have 9-to-5 jobs in my family. And so it didn't occur to me that working on a weekend was a weird thing. It didn't occur to me that working on holidays is a weird thing. I don't think I understood like why people took vacations over Christmas and Thanksgiving and like around school holidays until I was like in my 30s. Because in my mind, you kind of just did what you needed to around how you operated your business.
And do you think there's something about the fact that your mom was a pharmacist and your dad was doing medical supply? Like, these are things that are helping people. So of course you kind of need to be working on vacations and weekends because people always need help. Do you think that shaped your perspective as well?
You know, I had a pretty gritty childhood in Atlantic City, and I ended up going to boarding school when I was 14 and largely living pretty independent from age 14 on. I think the thing that really drove me was my own desire to succeed and make sure that I had the security that I could create for myself. And so I felt that self-reliance and that entrepreneurial background really is what drove me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, okay, so you mentioned you became very independent, went off to boarding school when you were 14. And when you were a teenager, you and your brother worked summers in the Jersey Shore running carnival games. What was it like to be independent at 14, and what drove that entrepreneurial drive, and how did you end up on the boardwalk with these carnival games?
When you're from Atlantic City, you end up on the boardwalk. My older brother and I owned 2 carnival games of chance on the Wildwood, New Jersey boardwalk. Fluky ball, which I think is now illegal, and the softball in a milk can carnival game. And I'm sure everyone has played softball in a milk can. And those games were easy to set up. They're all cash. All you needed to do was get a lease in Wildwood, which we were able to do. And then they're all cash businesses. And as long as you work them, you don't really need a lot of technology. You don't need a lot of skill. You need to work hard. And so that seemed like a fun summer thing to do. I think it's completely consistent with an entrepreneurial background, that would just be the ordinary course thing that a Jersey kid would go do. And then I owned a bunch of businesses when I was in school, like an ad specialty company. I made T-shirts for in college for all the Greek fraternity and sororities. I had a taxi business. I wish I was smart enough to have created the rideshare companies that exist today, but I wasn't smart enough then. And I, had a taxi business with my sorority sisters at Penn to take people to and from the airport in busy times during vacation holidays. And so that was just who I was. If I saw a need for something, I wanted to just set it up and go do it. And I didn't see a reason why you couldn't go do that. And then the last thing I did, I worked at the Wharton Small Business Development Center, and I helped small businesses then. So I don't know how I ended up so consistent from a kid all the way through to today, but I am.
What about your approach and your leadership style do you think has made you so successful? You said scrappy, entrepreneurial, but what kind of a leader are you?
I have not really thought about that question. I kind of just do. I think the things that I've been told, the way that I operate, I'm incredibly decisive. I really like to listen to all kinds of feedback. Doesn't matter whether it's from the most junior person at our company, the most senior, or even external stakeholders. If someone has feedback for us, I like to listen to that, and then I like to go. And that could be on a product decision, it could be on a people decision, it could be on a partnership decision. I don't like to equivocate. I think there's only so much information and signals you could take in before you need to make a decision. And I don't like to see analysis paralysis. So that's one component of the way I make decisions. The other is I'm very attuned to EQ, culture, how people operate, how they feel. I want my company to be a place that people like to work. And I want it to feel good. I want it to be inclusive. I want it to be a place that people are proud. That also means it's an incredibly high performance culture, because really smart people like to work with really, really, really smart people. And so I want A+ players. I want it to be optimized for smart decisions, first principles decisions, and going.
You have a reputation of being really good with managing relationships. And back when you were at Yahoo, you were tasked with repairing its relationship with Alibaba, which was not a good situation at the time. You succeeded. You ended up renegotiating the deal, which ended up giving Yahoo a 15% stake in Alibaba, which was ultimately worth about $40 billion. So you took a toxic relationship and you turned it into a valuable partnership. How do you think about creating relationships and fixing broken ones?
So the Alibaba situation, I'd say, is fairly unprecedented in corporate America. The challenge is between Yahoo as a shareholder of Alibaba, and then also as a shareholder of Alipay. And there's lots of complexity in those relationships. And prior to my participation on the board of Alibaba, there was an extremely acrimonious relationship between the leadership of Yahoo and the ownership of Alibaba. And so when I was appointed to the board of directors, I basically set out to show up and to be a good fiduciary on behalf of Alibaba first, which was the board I was on, and Yahoo second. And I understood both of those roles. And I set out to build trust between Jack Ma and Joe Tsai, the rest of the executive team at Alibaba, and the board and management team of Yahoo. So what I did was essentially show up. What that means in this context is I went to China a lot. I spent time with people. I got to know them. I ended up working with them to make decisions. I supported them in decisions that they wanted to make. And I didn't start from a point of view of a toxic relationship and mistrust. I started from level setting and starting over. So that was the first point. And once they got to trust me, I think they really appreciated that I had their best interests at heart. And then we began a renegotiation of some of the terms of the agreements between Yahoo and Alibaba. And I think those agreements yielded incredible financial gains back to Yahoo public company shareholders, which I'm very proud of. I think it also took the integrity of Joe Tsai and Jack Ma in order to do those trades, because in many cases we had no negotiating leverage. And so it was the trust between the parties that made them willing to work with us on those relationships.
So what do you think the takeaway is? That no matter how terrible the situation, you can always start by building trust?
I did think that's the part that mattered. I mean, one, it was helpful that I was new. I didn't have any of the personal animus that was there prior to my showing up on the board of Alibaba. And I think starting fresh with a fresh pair of eyes, I was able to start over and say, it wasn't me, let's start over. But I think the trust is really important, and seeing that you have someone's best interests at heart, and that even if you're negotiating a different point of view, you can argue why something has to happen and let them understand the why. And so understanding the why was pretty important in how we operated that relationship, so that even if I was arguing something on behalf of Yahoo that really mattered to Yahoo shareholders, if they understood where I was coming from, I think they were willing to give me the benefit of the doubt and try to work with me on it.
It's amazing how all of these different parts of your experience have led to where you are today. I want to hear a little bit about how you think about building culture. When you were working back on Wall Street decades ago, you were often in very male-dominated cultures. What did you learn from those cultures and all the different places you've worked when it comes to building culture now?
I've worked in some amazing companies, and the advice I often give to people is pick your colleagues, pick the best company you can, everything else will follow, because you absorb so much information from your peers and the people you work around. So take Goldman Sachs, for example. It was fairly transformational for me as my first job. I didn't learn how to do Excel. I learned teamwork. I learned client centricity. I learned mentorship at Goldman Sachs. And I saw how a culture that has operating principles was so powerful in order to build a very large-scale company. I also watched terrible cultures. So I worked in private equity. I didn't think that was a particularly strong culture at all. They used to be run like country clubs. Now they've kind of institutionalized and they're massive financial services companies. But at the time, I watched cultures that didn't work. And I think the impact of that on business outcomes was extraordinary. And so having seen both, I set out at Lead, for example, to build an amazing culture. And so we built a culture that was driven off of operating principles, like client centricity, foster innovation, believe in divergent perspectives and go embrace them, because I want to hear feedback and I want to hear divergence, and I want everyone to be able to filter information to give me feedback and to make the company better. And so in a company and culture like that, I think you're able to make the best decisions. And in a place where you're building tech products and innovation really matters, you have to get information really quickly. The quicker you get it, the quicker you act, the quicker you can go build new products. Absolutely transformational in trying to build a legendary company, which we are at Lead.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Another thing that's unusual about Lead is that it's majority female owned, which is rare in the financial sector. You have a very diverse team. How has diversity helped your organization?
Yeah, I think today we're the second largest female-owned bank in the United States. and were run by a pretty diverse group of people. And that was not purposeful. We picked the best people for the job. And my co-founders, I'll start there. I have a female co-founder and I have 2 male co-founders. My CFO is also female. My COO is female. My head of HR is female. Head of design is male. And I am lucky in that those are the people who I know that are incredible at their jobs. And the majority of our company is actually female. 66% of our employees are female. That is not by design. It just is who has been hired. And I feel like we run a pretty inclusive, performance-driven culture, and these are the people who perform and rock it.
So you didn't have some sort of DEI strategy. These are just the people you hired. But right now, this concept of DEI is under attack. What's your advice to small business owners or to entrepreneurs about how to navigate these issues when they want to build the best team?
Yeah, so on DEI, my favorite parts of DEI are the I and then the D. I have never been a fan of the E. And that's because I strongly believe in a performance culture, and I really only want the highest performers to excel. And so the places where I have been focused are building a company where people feel like they're included and anyone can have a voice. That to me is inclusion. And I don't find that as politically divisive, that you just want your employees to feel like they belong. Doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter what they believe. I own a company in Kansas City, Missouri. I have offices in New York. I have 2 offices in California. I have people who come from every walk of life, every part of the political spectrum. I don't want to shove my personal ideology down anyone's throat. I don't want to take political stands. I want to build a great company. I want it to be performance driven, but I really want people to feel like they're part of the team. And that's where the I takes place. And on diversity, I feel like I want people from all over the world. I want them to have all different points of view. That's the idea of embracing divergent perspectives to me, where if people come at ideas with different points of view, it's only going to make the thinking crisper. And so I do believe that has value in a company. And I think destroying the idea of inclusion for what it means and diversity for what it could mean, I find value destructive, but I believe that it's gotten, unfortunately, construed in politics. But I've tried to abstract myself away from the politics and decide how it applies to my company. And so I do still believe in the I and the D.
So you've described how in so many ways you're the same person you were when you were starting businesses in college. But I wonder if now you feel like you've changed. If there are ways that you are working that are different, way you see work and leadership is different now. Are you less of a workaholic than you were in your 20s?
I love working, so no. I could wake up at 5 a.m. every day and think about work, and it's embedded in my personal life in an extreme way. I love it. I love what I do. I think the place that I have changed over time is twofold. One, I think as a human, I've become a better human as I have evolved. I think I'm more empathetic, I'm more understanding, I'm a better listener. And I think that's a result of having children and being forced to have the biggest challenges you'll ever have with situations that you're in with your kids. And so I have taken their feedback to heart, and it all applies to your work life.
So a final question. What is the best advice you've ever received? Or is there something that you know now that you wish you had known earlier in your career?
One of my favorite pieces of advice comes from a partner at Goldman Sachs. So this is ages ago. Her comment to me was, think about not what your boss needs, but what your boss's boss needs. And so if you pay attention to that level, so 2 levels up, it'll make you more in tune to what the person you work for might be thinking, might be feeling, the pressure they're under, and what they might need. And so that's the advice I often give to my team, and I often feel for myself, even with my investors and my board, And so I find if I can put myself in the shoes of the person I work for, so in my case, it's my investors, my shareholders, my board, I understand what might be asked of me and why I might need to do something. And I find that that makes me a little bit more empathetic about the situation that I'm in at work.
It sounds like you are driven by empathy, whether it's for the small businesses you're working with or the fintechs you're providing infrastructure to, or even to your board investors. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights with us. Jackie Reses, CEO of Lead Bank. Thank you for having us here today.
Thank you.